Hello，咁多謝大家今日咧嚟到我哋 Wall Street English 嘅 IELTS 高分策略網上講座啦。咁今日咧我哋會有兩個 host，一個係我同埋我隔離呢位阿 Jane。咁我哋都係 Wall Street English 嘅課程顧問嚟嘅。咁同學仔一陣有咩問題咧就唔好怕醜啊。咁你哋可以開咪或者喺 chat box 度問我哋都 OK 嘅。
係啦，咁啊為咗鼓勵多啲同學仔同我哋有互動啦，咁我哋喺講座度咧就會問啲問題嘅。咁如果答啱問題嘅同學仔咧，咁我哋都會送翻本我哋 Wall Street English 自己出嘅 IELTS 英文同埋50蚊超市現金券嘅。咁啊，我哋都會 arrange 同事俾你攞翻啦。
咁好嘅，答問題就可以有禮品送翻。係啊，咁同學仔都要積極啲咯喎。
好啦，咁啊未開始講座之前啦，咁我都講下咧，我哋成個講座有啲咩流程同埋有啲咩環節啦。咁啊，首先我都會介紹下 Wall Street English 嘅背景啦，因為有啲同學都唔係好熟悉我哋啦。咁啊，亦都會講下 IELTS 係啲咩啦，咁同埋咧佢考試內容啦。咁中間嘅部分咧，我哋會請我哋嘅資深導師咧講下我哋 IELTS 嘅策略同埋一啲考試技巧。咁亦都會講下我哋嘅 support 課程啦。最後一個環節就係問答環節啦。咁好啦，即係事不宜遲啦。咁啊，講下我哋 Wall Street English 學校先啦。咁啊 Wall Street English 咧喺全球嚟講咧已經有400間分校噶啦。咁亦都分佈喺咧28唔同國家啦。咁超過咗咧49年嘅教學經驗噶啦。咁而我哋教 IELTS 嘅課程咧已經超過10年嘅歷史噶啦。即係話咧，我哋嘅教材啦、老師啦都係一個非常專業嘅水平噶啦。好啦，咁咧亦都講下香港啦。咁我哋咧有7間分校喺香港唔同港九新界地區啦，咁啊方便同學仔啦。好啦，咁啊入到正題啦。咁啊話明今日就係呢個 IELTS 高分講座。咁究竟咧大家知唔知咧咩係 IELTS 咧？
有冇同學仔都答得到啊？可以開咪或者 chat box 講喎。
咁究竟考幾多份 paper 咧？有冇人知咧？可以喺 chat box 嗰度答喎，有獎嘅喎。
唔緊要，有同學仔答咗喎
，4份，
哇，好 mark 低先
嚟喎，嗱，哇，
有獎即刻都答咗，
真係最簡單。咁叫咩名啊？
好多名，好勁啊！真係。
係啦，好簡單，因為都 show 咗。
地鐵都仲可能有。
咁好啦，咁咧就都我諗個個都知啦。咁我都講下 IELTS 究竟係啲咩嚟㗎啦。咁其實咧佢個名咧就叫做國際英語水平測試啦。咁啊內容咧就好似你哋頭先答咁樣啦，4份 paper 聽説讀寫。咁亦都係咧，即係我哋講目前嚟講啦，係最多人咧即係國際最廣泛認可嘅英文測試之一嘅。咁啊目的咧其實咧就係想評估一啲人咧。想去英語為母語國家去讀書啦、移民啦、工作嘅人嘅英文能力嘅。咁啊，所以咧就啲人個個睇你英文能力咧，就係睇呢個 IELTS 分數嘅喎。你話係咪啦，Sally？
咁其實考到一個高嘅分數都真係好重要喎。
梗係啦，咁所以咧，我哋就特登做呢個 webinar，就幫翻啲同學仔啦。
好啦，咁講到 IELTS 分數咁重要，咁其實要考到幾多分啊？
嗱，你話考幾多分咧，就好睇你嘅目的嘅。咁如果係升學啊、移民啊，唔同國家咧，其實唔同學校都會有佢唔同要求嘅喎。咁啊，可以睇翻啲少少例子啦。咁啊，你睇下黃色嗰度啦。咁見到咧，如果你考 IELTS 嘅分數咧，只係到達6至6.5分咧，其實你淨係可以 apply 到一啲學術要求冇咁高嘅課程嘅。咁如果咧你去到7至7.5分啦，即係中間嘅位置啦，咁你就非常之好啦，因為咧基本上世界上即係可能香港啊最 top 嘅大學咧，你都可以 apply 到嘅。咁而8分咧就甚至可以即係去到一個 master 嘅水平啦。
咁移民咧，咁其實我都聽好多人講話，要計分喎，點樣計法啊？
係啊，移民都有好多唔同計法㗎。咁啊，例如好似即係澳洲咁樣啦，啲人即係個個都成日都話去澳洲啦。咁其實咧，佢會根據你 IELTS 嘅分數去俾分嘅。咁你越高 IELTS 分數咧，其實佢就越即係俾得多分你，咁你就越容易攞到永久居留㗎啦。咁但係咧，即係最緊要咧就係你要7分以上，佢先至俾分你嘅。咁仲有啦，即係難度高啲嘅加拿大技術移民，咁啊最少都要攞到 IELTS 嘅6分，佢先至俾你 apply 嘅。咁即係你覺得 高分緊唔緊要啊？Sally？
咁梗係緊要啦。
係啦，咁啊，所以咧就即係要攞翻個 IELTS 嘅 cert，即係高分嘅 IELTS 嘅即係證書啦。咁都好緊要啦。咁尤其是咧，我都知道即係而家好多 DSE 嘅同學仔，咁其實咧佢有時有機會啦，即係 touch wood，即係 IELTS 即係 DSE 失手嘅話咧，其實都可以咧去考翻張 IELTS 嘅即係高分啲嘅 cert 啦，去補翻你而家 DSE 嘅分數，咁就去 apply 本地嘅大學。因為咧點解咁講咧？因為DSE 你一年先考一次，其實咧 IELTS 年年都有得考嘅。咁但係都要講句啦，就係 IELTS 嘅分數咧，其實佢只係有限期咧係2年嘅啫。咁所以同學仔咧就要小心個 timeline 啦。
明白。咁有時咧都聽人哋講話 IELTS 有分咗呢個 academic 啦，同埋 general training。其實佢最主要分別係乜嘢㗎？
其實咧都真係有分別嘅。不過都問下同學仔啦，即係佢哋嚟緊，即係你哋啦，嚟緊諗住咧考 academic 啊，定係 general training 啦？
咁如果你考 academic 嘅，就喺 chat box 度打字；如果你哋考 general training 嘅咧，就喺 chat box 度打2字。
係啦，咁啊睇下啲人，哇！有人考1考2，好多人考1喎。
係咯，一多啲，2都有。
係啦，都有2嘅。咁啊，
咁不如阿 Jane 講解下個分別啦，我哋。
係啦，咁啊都真係有分別嘅。咁如果你嘅目的咧要去即係讀書啦、求學啦，或者咧即係工作上邊去啲政府機構啊、商業機構啦，其實咧大部分都係要你考 academic 呢份 paper 嘅。咁如果係移民的話咧，移民局係會收 general training 嘅。咁所以咧就唔好考錯啦，即係因為唔可以調轉嘅。咁啊考錯咗，你真係要重新考過㗎。
明白。咁考試內容咧，考試內容有啲咩分別㗎？
都有分別㗎。咁主要嚟講咧，就係writing 同埋 reading 佢有分別嘅。咁你睇翻呢個圖表啦，咁啊左邊咧就係 writing 啦。其實咧writing 嘅 academic 裏邊咧，佢會考你一啲圖表啊，或者係一啲嘅 graph 啊，一啲嘅 data 啊。咁佢要考你咧，就係喺裏邊圖表去分析啦，或者係要你 summarize 一啲嘢嘅。咁而 general training 咧，佢主要咧就會考你一啲嘅書信啊，或者係一啲日常生活嘅 topic。你要去做一啲討論嘅。咁其實兩者咧都有特定嘅格式或者係特定嘅用字，你亦都好需要咧清楚佢哋嘅出題方向啦，同埋個評分標準嘅。咁另外 reading 方面啦，academic 咧即係右手邊啦，咁academic 嗰份paper 咧，佢會考你睇3篇嘅學術性文章，咁每篇咧大概1000字左右。咁而 general training 咧，佢主要要你睇一啲短文嘅，咁大概兩者嘅字數差唔多，都係60分鐘嘅時間。咁但係咧喺呢度嚟講咧，好多學生咧都真係睇唔切，咁因為咧佢唔係好識攞重點啊，咁所以咧呢個即係兩份 paper 都有佢嘅難度嘅。
時間限制聽落真係唔容易喎。
係啊，都真係難㗎。咁好啦，既然講到咁啦，講到 IELTS 嘅考試卷咧嘅難度，咁唔知你哋同學仔即係我諗你哋即係有啲人咧都即係可能睇過啲 past paper 啦。咁你覺得邊一份卷咧係最難咧？喺4份卷當中，咁都可以咧喺個 chat box 嗰度答下啲問題啊，有獎㗎。係啦，睇下你哋覺得邊份卷？writing、listening、writing， 哇 ，OK， 都好多人講 writing 喎。都有 reading 啊。
我都估係 writing， 因為你又話又要圖表，有咁多嘅分析。
係啊，頭先我講咗係啦 ，writing 咧其實咧真係都比較難嘅。咁點解咧？咁我實際咧俾啲數據你哋睇下啦。咁呢個表咧就係講緊2021年啊全球考 IELTS 嘅同學仔嘅平均分。咁咧橙色嗰條巴啦，見到係 listening。同灰色咧就係 reading 啦，黃色就係 writing 喎。咁最後咧藍色嗰條巴咧就係 speaking 嘅。咁全球第一嘅德國咧，排行第一個德國啊，佢嘅平均分咧係7.4分喎。不過咧就你睇到黃色嗰條巴啦，咁竟然咧同我哋排第12嘅香港咧 差唔多喎，都即係唔係咁勁嘅啫喎，佢哋嗰啲 writing。
我見到佢哋主要其實 listening、reading 同埋 speaking 好過我哋咯。
係啊，即係點解咧？因為咧 IELTS 嘅 writing 同埋 speaking 咧，其實係一個比較難嘅 paper 嘅，相比其他兩份卷嚟講，咁佢都需要一啲即係比較多啲嘅考試技巧㗎。咁所以咧，其實咧你都要擺多啲時間去專注提升呢兩份 paper 啦。咁但係咧都唔可以忽略 listening 同埋reading 喎，因為咧你要記住咧 IELTS 咧嘅總分咧係4份卷加埋嘅平均分。如果你喺 reading 同埋 listening 做得好嘅話咧，即係你可以拉翻高個分㗎。咁所以就真係要即係份卷都要做好啦，即係你知啱啦。
好，咁其實真係要拉上補下啦。如果你咁樣講，要攞 overall 嘅成績，咁其實究竟有咩方法可以幫我哋達到我哋要嘅 IELTS 分數㗎？
係啦，我都覺得你問得好好。咁你睇下嗱，右手邊呢個同學仔啦，右手邊呢個咧就係 IELTS 嘅 report 嚟嘅。咁啊 final 嘅分數咧，佢咧係8分嘅 overall 成績。咁係咪好高分啦？係啊，你估下佢其實用咗啲咩方法咧？有冇知道咧？
考多幾次？
唔係，即係唔係叫佢走去考10次。咁其實咧係用咗，即係我哋咁講啦，用咗一個正確嘅考試技巧啦。咁再加上一個咧就理想嘅時間去練習同埋實踐嘅。咁其實咧就已經可以做到咁嘅效果噶啦。
咁其實如果都明嘅，如果你淨係得技巧、考試技巧，但係你考試嘅時候唔識用翻出嚟，其實就真係冇用嘅。
係啦，冇錯。咁所以咧就以下落嚟就睇下究竟我哋用咗啲咩方法，咁啊做到呢個效果啦。咁啊當然要請翻我哋嘅專業導師就去講解下啦。咁我覺得咧就阿 Sally 應該都好熟悉呢個專業導師嘅。邊個嚟嘅咧？
係啊，其實我哋今日咧嘅導師咧就會係我哋升級導師 Walter 啦。咁 Walter 其實咧佢除咗10年嘅教學經驗之外啦，咁當中有7年主要係教 IELTS 嘅。咁佢仲幫我哋設計咗我哋 IELTS 嗰個課程㗎，令到我哋課程咧係可以得到呢個資歷架構嘅認證添。咁呢個認證咧，其實如果你話香港嘅私人學校嚟講咧，其實係絕無僅有㗎，係令到我哋嘅 IELTS 係變咗一個 cert level 㗎。可以。
好啦，咁啊多謝 Sally 介紹啦。我哋請阿 Walter 老師咧就同我哋講解下啦。好。
Walter, are you ready?
I'm always ready.
Great. So I will stop sharing the screen.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Hi, everybody. So thanks again, Jane and Sally. So we've got quite a bit of stuff to talk about. I know you all want to score the highest that you can on the IELTS exam. So without further ado, let's talk about the 4 parts of the exam. First off, we're going to talk about listening. So for the listening part of the exam, we have 40 questions, 10 questions per section. Now, it doesn't matter if you take the general or the academic exam, it's exactly the same. The first 2 sections are going to be a general topic, as you can see here. And then the last 2 sections will be an academic topic. Try to keep in mind, since the first 2 are far easier than the last 2 sections, try to score more in the first 2 sections. A lot of students forget that 1 easy mark is the same as 1 difficult mark. So try to use that as a strategy when you're taking the listening part of the test. Now, the audio is only played 1 time. Nothing is repeated. Now, what kind of questions might you see in the listening section of the exam? So we have a whole bunch on the left, just to give you an idea of what they may look like. Now, if you're coming from an HKCEE or HKDSE background, a lot of those strategies do work, but you do have to keep in mind that the IELTS listening is generally easier because you only need to write down exactly what they say. So you do not, I repeat, you do not need to change the part of speech. You do not need to change the word from study to studious or habit to habitual. They like to do that on the DSE exam as an example. You only need to listen for that exact word, and then it will be correct. So in that way, it is a bit easier. So you have things like table completion, labeling a diagram or map, sentence completion, short answers. Short answers is another kind that's a lot easier. It's always 3 words or less. You do not need to write long sentences like in other exams. So that's another way that it can be simpler for you. Multiple choice as well as matching. Usually students score the highest on the listening part of the exam. So you should have confidence that you can probably do well in this section quite well. Any questions, please let me know. You can always let me know in the chat or raise your hand. Let's move on to the reading portion. So the reading portion is exactly the same, 40 questions, just like listening. However, it's over 3 reading passages, and you will have 1 hour to do it all. Now, it may seem like a lot of time. However, you do have to keep in mind that there are about 2,750 words. So if you take into account reading all those words and answering all those questions, many students do not, I repeat, do not have enough time to finish everything, especially if you are reading every single word. So you'll have to find some strategies to avoid doing that. Otherwise, you probably won't finish like I already mentioned. Add on to that, after you have put in your answers into your answer sheet, you'll need to move them to the final answer sheet. So when it says you have 60 minutes, when you have to move the answers over to the answer sheet, you will probably have even less than that. So it might take you about 5 minutes to transfer your answers over to the final answer sheet. Once you keep that in mind, it's going to be a lot more difficult. Let's take a look at some of the question types. So lots of question types. Not going to go over all of them. You can take a look yourself. It is very similar to the listening part of the exam, where everything is in the text word for word. So you only need to write down exactly what the text says. So in that way, it's also easier than any other English exams. If you're very good at synonyms and you understand parallel expressions, how to say something or the same thing in a different way, you will excel at the reading portion of the exam. If you don't, then it'll be a little bit more challenging. One of the things I do want to note, it says true, false, not given. There's also something called yes, no, not given, and 99% of the time it is the same. However, when it is different, true, false, not given is asking for a fact. Yes, no, not given is asking for an opinion of the author. So 99% of the time it's similar, but once in a while it can be different. So keep that in mind. Going through this quite quickly, I know a lot of students do quite well in the reading section. It's no wonder the reading section is the second easiest portion for IELTS test candidates. Any questions, please let me know. All right. Let's move on to the juicy parts. Let's talk about writing. Now, writing is something that most people dread. They don't like doing it. And it makes sense. It's the last part of any language acquisition. If you think about the language, your native language or your mother tongue, writing is probably the last thing you learn, and it's probably the weakest out of all the 4 skills. And it's no different here. Unfortunately, this is where most students drop the ball. They're not able to acquire the mark they need. So it's probably where you need the most focus. This part of the exam is where students score the lowest marks. Now, when you do the writing part of the exam, they're going to give you 2 parts at the same time. They'll give you writing task 1 and task 2, and you'll have 1 hour to complete both. So here, you should spend 20 minutes. Just keep in mind, it is your job to allocate the time correctly. So it is not like they give you writing task 1 and then they take away the paper at 20 minutes. What ends up happening many times is test candidates may spend far too much time on writing task 1, and they don't look at the clock and they forget about it. They spend 25 minutes or 30 minutes, and then they do not have enough time for writing task 2. So make sure you allocate your time correctly. I would only spend about 20 minutes on this. If you're going over, you generally will not finish task 2. Now, if you're taking the general exam, you'll be writing a letter, very similar to what they asked you to do in part A of writing for the HKDSC. But if you're taking the academic exam, they're going to ask you to write a report, usually about a table or chart. Could be a diagram, a process, it could be a map. Make sure to write at least 150 words, though I do recommend that you write about 170 to 200. Lots of students try to count how many words they have, and that takes 2 minutes to count. It would just be better for you to write an extra sentence or two in that time to expand your word count. Lastly, your writing task 1 is worth 1/3 of your mark. Writing task 2 is worth 2/3 of your mark. Let's talk about the marking scheme. And this is lots of words for important. You can look this up. It's very imperative or pivotal, critical, crucial for you to understand how you're going to score well on the writing portion of the exam. Now, there are a few things that you can do. First off, you can access this marking scheme online. You just go onto the internet and type IELTS writing task 1. You can type marking scheme or band descriptors, and you'll see this. So this is public information, nothing secret here. You'll notice there are 4 different components. We have task achievements, which simply means, did you do what they asked you to do? And I'll explain that a bit more afterwards. We have coherence and cohesion. How did you organize your writing? Is it easy to understand? Does it flow into the other parts? Let's Go resource is just a fancy way of saying vocabulary. So it might sound scary. What is lexical? It just means, is your vocabulary good? Lastly is grammatical range and accuracy. Now, there's many things that comprise grammatical range and accuracy. The main thing would be tenses and spelling and punctuation. Tenses would probably be the major factor in writing task 1. Here are some of the question types that you'll see in writing task 1. So there's lots of different varieties that can be good and can be bad. What I can say is this, though. A lot of the skills that you learn are transferable to all parts. So the most common ones would be something like this, like a pie chart. And you'll notice here as an example, we have 2 different pie charts and it says 1981, 1991. So I want to ask you, a lot of you are quite smart. What tenses do you think you'd be using for a question that's in 1981 and 1991? So you can let me know in the chat room. What kind of tenses do you think you'd primarily use? Past tense, past tense. Yes, past tense. Okay. There's, yes, lots of past, past, past. Wow, 15 past. Okay, can you be more specific? Which past tense? Let's see the difference. Okay, simple past. Okay, yeah, simple past, good. Is there another past tense you might use? Past perfect. Thank you, whoever that dot person is, Kelvin and all these other people. Excellent. So the two primary tenses, you guys are so smart, you don't even need me. You need to write past simple tense and past perfect tense. If you only write in past simple tense, it's okay. But when you're doing the comparison, you will not get maximum marks for grammar. So if you're right and you put in past simple tense and past perfect tense, then you can score maximum marks. So excellent. I'm very happy to see that. Very happy to see that. So good job. All right, very good. Let's look at this bar chart on the top right. Let me ask you this. It doesn't give you a time. What tense do you think you would write this in? Maybe, there we go, Mavis. First one, simple present tense, right? Because it doesn't tell you any time. It's a routine or habit or fact. So you have to use it in present simple tense. So if you write it in any other tense, it is wrong. Very good. Wow, so smart. I'm going to be out of a job soon. All right. Now, if you take a look at the bottom right, this is a map. Maps, generally, test candidates or students are very fearful of them. They are extremely rare. They happen less than 5% of the time. So if you get a map, you are unlucky. That means you're being punished for some reason. You did something bad, and now you have to do a map. However, if you get a map, it's exactly the same strategy as anything else. Notice we have 3 different tenses, 1900, 1950, and the year 2000. So you'd still have to write it in past simple tense and past perfect tense. So it's the same strategies. The language is slightly different. So instead of saying increase and decrease all the time, like with numbers, you might use words like expand or it got wider or more narrow, something like that. So that language, there's certain language that is very specific to maps or sizes that cannot be applied to numbers. So that's where it gets a little bit more challenging, but the principles are still the same. So don't panic and say, oh, it's completely different, I'm going to score poorly. It's not like that. You just have to use a little bit different vocabulary. What we have in the top part is we have a process. If it's a process, there's a few things, or actually quite a few things you need to do. You have to use passive voice. You have to use participle clauses. There's a lot of things that I could talk about. It would take a whole hour to really get down to it, but just understand that processes are a little bit different than if it's a table or chart. Make sure that you always have an overview, which is just a summary. If you miss the overview, you will score 5 or less for your task achievement. It even says that in the marking scheme. Presents a clear overview. If you don't do that, no clear overview, that's a score of 5. The other thing you must make sure you do, if it has something to do with numbers, is you must present data. If you have no data, you will also score 5 or less for task achievement. So those are the 2 largest errors students or test candidates make when writing the academic task 1 portion. All right, excellent. Okay, any other questions about writing task 1? You can let me know. We're going to head into writing task 2, if nothing else. So writing task 2 is the essay portion. You'll have about 40 minutes if you allocate your time correctly. It asks you to write at least 250 words. However, usually you should write around 270 to 300. If you're writing about 250, you may not have enough words to describe what you need to talk about. So what is in this portion of the exam? Let's look at the marking scheme again. Now, the great thing about the marking scheme is that all 3 of them are very similar. If you compare this writing task 2 marking scheme to what we just looked at for writing task 1, it's 99% the same. Grammatical range and accuracy is the same. lexical resource or vocabulary is the same. Coherence and cohesion is the same. The only thing that is a little bit different is in the task achievement part. In the task achievement, they're going to ask you primarily for two main things. One is you need to identify how many things you need to do. And secondly is an opinion or non-opinion question. Every single time, you will be tasked to do 1, 2, or 3 things. Never 4, never more. So you need to identify how many things you need to answer. If you can identify that, you'll be fine. Then, like I said, is an opinion or non-opinion question. If you fail to do any of these, as an example, if they ask you to answer 3 questions, but you only answer 2, you will score 5 or less for task achievement. If they ask you to answer in an opinion way and you answer in a non-opinion fashion, then you will automatically score 5 or less for task achievement. This is the #1 issue or difficulty IELTS students or test candidates have when writing the essay portion. So let's take a look at a sample question so you can get a better idea about what I'm talking about. So if we take a look, here is a question. It says, too much emphasis is placed on testing these days. The need to prepare for tests and examinations is a restriction on teachers and also exerts unnecessary pressure on young learners. To what extent do you agree or disagree? So let me know, you guys are so smart. Let me know in the chat room, how many questions do you need to answer? Do you need to answer 1, 2, or 3 questions, do you think? Give you a bit of time to reread it. Johnson says 1. Melody 1. Got lots of 1s. 1 question mark. 2. Oh, the first one with a 2. 3, 2, 2. It seems like some of you like to copy each other. There was a whole bunch of 1s and a whole bunch of 2s. Okay. So for this question, you need to answer 2 things. Is this a restriction on teachers? And secondly, does it exert unnecessary pressure on young learners? So those are the 2 questions you need to answer. As long as you answer these 2 questions, and then you can identify whether or not it's an opinion or non-opinion question, you will score 6 or higher for task achievement. Now, let's get to the second part. Is this a personal opinion question or a non-opinion question? Let me know what you think in the chat room. Lots of opinions. Okay. I can't trick you. Fine. You win this one. It clearly says, to what extent do you agree or disagree? Exactly. So it's an opinion question. Very good. If you look at the sample introductory paragraph, what they've done is they've paraphrased or they've rephrased the question in a way that you can still understand it. The idea that evaluations have become a limitation on instructors. This is a paraphrase of restriction on teachers. Unneeded stress on youngsters. We have unnecessary, unneeded pressure, stress, young learners, youngsters. So when you write your introductory paragraph, try to rephrase it without copying a lot of the vocabulary. And then they clearly state their personal opinion, which is exactly what they asked for when it says, to what extent do you agree or disagree? If you can do that, then you'll score 6 or higher for task achievement. Excellent. All right. So very, very good of you. Any questions about writing task 2, please let me know. Obviously, there's lots more to digest in the body paragraphs and conclusion. But we're going to move on to the last part. What we have here is the marking scheme for speaking. So once again, 4 different criteria. It's slightly different, but a lot of them are the same. Grammatical range and accuracy is the same. Lexical resource is the same. The 2 that are slightly different is fluency and coherence and pronunciation. So let's start off with fluency and coherence. This simply means, can you speak at length, so for a longer period of time without noticeable effort? You should avoid looking around, making noises, those sorts of things. It should appear to be easy when you are speaking. You can demonstrate some hesitation at times or a little bit of self-correction and repetition. One of the biggest questions I get is, if I make a mistake, should I self-correct? The answer is yes. Now, if you self-correct, and actually this is very similar to the DSE, if you self-correct, you cannot score 9. You can only score 8. I'm so sorry if you're trying to get a perfect mark. I don't think many of you are. So my advice for you would be to always self-correct. So if you say something like, I go to the store yesterday, you should fix that. You go, oh, sorry, I meant to say I went to the store yesterday. The examiner listens to you 2 times, 1 time in person, and they also record it, so they listen to it a 2nd time at the office. So they will always catch your errors. If you think if you speak fast enough that they will miss your mistake, they will catch the error, I guarantee you. So always self-correct. The most important things, use a range of connectives. Please avoid using and, but, and because all the time. You want to use other language. So for an example, you might say something like in addition or furthermore. If you want to show contrast, you might use on the other hand or despite. If you want to show cause and effect, maybe you don't use because. You could use as a result or leads to. So when they say they want a range of connectives, that's what they're talking about. And lastly, for fluency and coherence, discourse markers. In language, sometimes we speak faster than we think. And so you get a lot of monkey noises. You get a lot of You have to understand that the exam is an English test. They can only assess your level of English. If you make a lot of animal sounds, they cannot give you scores for that. What you should do then is minimize those noises. However, in addition, you should use discourse markers. Discourse markers add no information. However, they make you sound more fluent. So the most common ones are well, so, actually, yeah, I mean. Those sorts of words or phrases you can add when you're speaking, and that will make you sound more fluent. When we get to the lexical resource, the main thing here that's different is idiomatic vocabulary. You have to have some idioms when you're speaking to score 7 or higher. The examiner is trained to verify or confirm that you know what that idiom is. So if you say something like, oh, math is a piece of cake for me, and a piece of cake means easy, the examiner might follow up with a question like, oh, so you find math difficult? And you would have to reply, no, I find it quite simple. And this is because in the past, some students would use lots of idioms, but they did not check if they actually knew what they meant. So now they are trained to verify that you know the meaning. So try to learn a few idioms and be ready to explain it as the examiners may ask you. For grammatical range and accuracy, tenses once again, the main issue has to be with word endings, and it actually leads into pronunciation. If you drop S's a lot, as an example, if you say, oh, I have 2 cat, you will lose lots of marks, both in grammatical range and accuracy, as well as pronunciation. You have to have that S sound. I have 2 cats. I have 10 cats. Make sure the word ending is very clear. It's also about the past tense of verbs, as an example. If you say that you dated a girl for 10 years, make sure you say that word dated, not date. That ED sound has to be pronounced very clearly. Otherwise, you'll lose marks in both pronunciation and grammatical range and accuracy. So that would be probably the biggest issue that some students have. And pronunciation, other than the word endings, as long as you pronounce the words correctly, it's fine. It is not based on your accent. Let's take a look at some parts of the exam. For the speaking part, we have 3 sections. So the first part is the easiest, and it's about 4 to 5 minutes long. They will ask you questions about you and your country. So if you look at some of these questions, do you like sports? Do you have a favorite sport? They might ask you, what's a popular sport where you live? Now, you should always paraphrase, but if you don't like paraphrasing, you could also give a direct natural response. I'm really into badminton, or absolutely. It also works if it's the opposite. Do you have a favorite sport? Absolutely not. Sports are for losers. That's not me saying that. That's an example. Anyways, the point is make sure that you paraphrase. Do not copy the words from the question. One of the key things you should try to do is to give more details and information. And you can do that by asking yourself the 5 W questions or how. One of the biggest mistakes students make is they assume speaking part 1 is simple, and it is. And so they might give simple answers, very short answers. Avoid doing that all the time. You can have some short answers and some longer answers. They want a mix of responses. If you keep giving short answers, you will score low, as it does not show your grammar. So just ask yourself a couple W questions when you're answering, and that should give you enough time and ideas to give to the examiner. So that is the first part of speaking. Let's talk about the second part. Now, part 2 is unique. Why is it unique? Well, this is the section where you have a little bit of preparation. Part 1 and part 3, you get no preparation time. But in this section, you do get 1 whole minute. That's not very much, but you do get it. Though they will give you a note card about the half of a size of a sheet of A4 paper. And they will always have a question that says, describe something. You will then be tasked to answer 4 questions about that topic. They will then say you have a minute to prepare some notes, and then you need to talk for 2 minutes. They will then ask, do you understand? Once you say yes, they will start the timer. When you take your notes, try to write things very in a short way. Do not write long sentences. Now, the benefit is your notes are not assessed. They are not evaluated. That means that you could draw pictures, you could write Chinese, you could spell everything the wrong way. As long as the notes are useful for you, that's what you should do. Then you need to talk for 2 minutes by yourself. If you have a bit of extra time left, the examiner may ask you a follow-up question. Try to describe and explain well. This is really pivotal, since in part 1, they keep asking you different questions, but in part 2, they do not. So it's your job to describe better. Try to use topic-specific vocabulary. This is a key thing in all parts. English is actually a pretty easy language to learn for the basics. The main issue is that English has far too much vocabulary. I'll try to explain something. The word people you can use in any situation. But I want to ask you, what topic-specific word would you use for the word people if they're on the bus or the MTR? Let me know in the chat room. What would you use instead of the word people? Passengers. Thank you, Harmony. There's another one. Starts with C. Does anyone know the probably more difficult one? Starts with a C. I know Sally and Jane are thinking. Do you know the one that starts with C? Customer? Well, technically, I guess if you're on the MTR, you're a customer. Technically, you would be a commuter. You'd be a commuter. Okay, here's a more difficult one. If you're in a restaurant, you can say people, 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 people. What is the topic specific word if you're at a restaurant and you're sitting down and you're eating? Guest. Guess is pretty general. I like that. Diner, a harmony, got 2 for 2. Yeah, diner. You are a diner. So this language you can only use in those specific situations. And that's why it's very difficult to score well in the speaking and writing portions of the exam for vocabulary, because you could use people for everything. I saw a bunch of people at the restaurant. I saw a bunch of people on the bus. I saw a bunch of people at the store, at the hospital, all correct. But you cannot score that high because it is not specific. So very good. Thanks for that, especially harmony. Last thing here that I'll mention, organize your speech well, because you're speaking for 2 minutes. It's much more important, critical, essential, crucial to have sequencing and linking words. So if you say, secondly, this, lastly, something else, on top of that, here's another thing, you want to use a lot of those linking words. And let's get to the last part. So part 3 is like part 1. It's about 4 to 5 minutes long, except it is much more complicated. So in part 1, they might be asking you about your favorite book, but then they might ask a question that's very difficult about books. So if you look at this, do you think people's shopping habits will change in the future? That is a lot more difficult than what is your favorite store? And due to that reality, one of the main things that they will be looking at is your support and explanation. Try to add very specific examples, and it is expected that your answers are quite long. They might be anywhere between 30 seconds to a minute long sometimes. A more complex concept requires more explanation, and that's very normal and typical. You use the same strategies as 4. You want to have advanced linkers, you want to have discourse markers, you want to have correct tenses, all that good stuff. So once again, this is the marking scheme. You can go online and find it, very similar to the other marking schemes. So we're gonna get down to the end here. One of the key things I want to make sure you understand, when you're paraphrasing, generally there are 4 ways to do it. 99% of the time, students use synonyms. In English, that's usually a good strategy. However, there are some words that don't have a lot of synonyms. So I'll give you an example. Here's a very simple word, student. Tell me, what's a good synonym for student? Pupil, that's it. Perfect, Kelvin. That's all the synonyms for student. So now, if you have to talk about a student again, there's no word that you could use without repeating yourself. So how do you paraphrase? Next, you should try to explain. So you give a definition. Those that are in school, those that are studying. You can explain what it is. That's another way to paraphrase. You could try to change the part of speech. The word student doesn't work well. I said the word earlier. What is the adjective for the word student? Let's see how smart you are. Some of you are probably going into Google, the dictionary, going to start cheating to find the adjective for student. A little bit difficult. It's okay. It's actually studious. So this is a word that even I do not use. But the point is that you could use different parts of speech to also paraphrase. Lastly, are pronouns. So if you've already mentioned it before, so if you said, oh, those students are doing X, Y, Z, then you could use a pronoun the next time you want to talk about them. You could say they are doing this because, and the word they is an example of a pronoun. So that's how you can paraphrase. Lots of pronouns, right? He, she, it, they, them, those, these. All the pronouns are extremely critical. And they're easy to use because you don't have to learn any new vocabulary. As long as it's said before, you can then reference it by using your pronoun. All right. Some questions I get every time. Should I take the computer or paper exam? This depends on you. You should only take the computer exam if your typing is much faster than your handwriting. That's the only time. But for, I'd say almost 95% of students, you should take the paper exam. If you take the writing exam, or excuse me, the computer exam, and you do the writing portion, students cannot see their spelling errors on the computer screen. And so they get much lower marks for grammatical range and accuracy. If you write, you can slowly write on a piece of paper, you can see it, and then you can erase things. But if it's on a computer screen, students do not see the spelling mistakes. So for 95% of students, I would say take the paper test. The only time you should take the computer test is if you're much faster in typing. A second most popular question, not really a question, but I want to score 8. I want to make this clear. If you want to score that high, native English speakers typically do not even score 8. So your goal may be a little bit high. There are things that you can do. The question I would really ask is, do you actually need an 8? Because most of the time when people say they want an 8, they don't actually need it. They just want to be cool. But it's not going to work very well. I'll just put it that way. But there are a few things that you can do. You can ask me. It might take a while to explain. And lastly, how do I learn vocabulary? There are lots of words in the English language. I can give you a whole bunch that you'll never use. Right? Pedagogy, Leviathan, acerbity. All those words are absolutely useless. Try to think about what words you use and what you repeat a lot. If you repeat the word because a lot, then learn alternatives for because. If you repeat the word school a lot, try to learn alternatives for school. Learning new vocabulary generally has to do with synonyms of words you're using all the time already. And that's it for this part. Just finishing off, any questions for me about the tests or English? Okay, well, you guys are a smart bunch, so that's good to hear. All right, excellent. Okay. No questions. I'm a little bit surprised. You guys are pretty active, but I'm glad to hear. I hope you got something out of this. So let's pass it back to Sally and Jane.
Okay. So thank you, Walter.
Thanks again.
Thank you so much. All right.好，咁好多謝 Walter 啦，喺度幫我哋講咗咁多關於 IELTS 嘅 tips 啊，同埋考試嘅技巧嘅。咁我諗同學仔都學咗好多。Thank you, Walter.
Thank you, Walter.
OK，咁我估同學仔應該都好想知道我哋其實畢咗業嘅學生嘅成績啊。咁我哋其實可以睇一睇，你睇下呢度啲同學仔其實好多滿分嘅 listening、滿分嘅 reading 都有嘅喎。咁同埋你見到佢哋嘅 writing 同埋 speaking 啦，其實都好過大部分香港人嗰個平均。writing 6分或者 speaking 6.3分嘅喎。係
啊，因為咧我哋嗰個課程咧都係一個全面提升課程啦，咁所以咧啲學生嘅成績咧都係咁勁噶。
我都好想了解下點樣可以做得到喎。
係啦，咁究竟點樣可以做到咧？其實我哋學校咧會提供4個 support 課程俾學生啦，咁令到佢哋咧可以喺 IELTS 嘅成績咧全面嘅提升嘅有一個。咁啊，第一個嘅課程咧就係一個叫90小時嘅備試課程啦，咁呢個咧係一個全面提升聽講讀寫4份卷嘅技巧課程嚟嘅，咁啊裏邊咧係圍繞住 IELTS 咧最常出嘅 topic 去教授嘅，咁即係話咧你上完成個 課程之後咧，你會好清楚所有 IELTS 出題嘅方向啦，而且你都會好熟悉咧 IELTS 嘅一啲嘅 topics 啦，要用到嘅詞彙啦、文法啦、句型等等嘅。咁亦都咧會有一啲練習嘅課堂啦，咁等你真係可以應用到喺你嘅考試裏邊，咁令到你嘅技巧咧可以融會貫通嘅。
咁如果有啲學生啊，佢可能淨係某一份卷特別弱，或者佢可能短時間內就已經要考咧，咁會唔會有其他嘢可以幫到佢㗎？
係啦，咁你就問得好好啦。咁其實咧，我哋都有一個 IELTS 嘅 VIP 1對1嘅課程啦。咁呢個班咧，主要係針對學生咧一啲特定需要而教授佢缺乏咗嘅技巧嘅。咁適合一啲時間比較急嘅學生啦。咁佢要喺一個短時間裏邊咧有一個特定嘅技巧提升去應試嘅。咁呢個課程咧就可以幫到佢啦。
咁聽落都幾有彈性嘅。咁其實你以前咧，你有冇考試嘅時候咧，發覺咧，你考完試之後咧，先覺得死啦！我有啲嘢之前溫咗冇擺落去，冇用到嘅喎。有冇試過好後悔，然之後想重新考多次啊？
成日都係咁噶啦。咁所以咧，我哋咧會有一個咧模擬考試嘅課程。咁當你咧做咗幾次模擬考試之後咧，你就真實知道自己嘅問題啦。咁呢個 mock class 咧，其實俾一啲學生有機會將佢自己學到嘅嘢咧，真係應用喺考試，即係模擬考試裏邊啦。咁然後咧，我哋會有一個專業嘅 IELTS 老師咧，一對一咁樣就你嘅表現咧，去俾翻一啲個人嘅建議你啦。咁等你真係實際知道自己問題同埋點樣改善，就即係可以到達你自己嘅目標分數啦。
咁聽落都幾好啊！即係起碼你可以掌握到個考試個節奏，即係每樣嘢花幾多時間嗰啲。
係啊，咁最後啦，我哋都有啲 online 嘅課程可以俾多啲彈性學生啦。咁好啦，講到咧，即係頭先咁多課程啦。其實咧，我哋90小時嘅課程咧係有一個課程認證嘅。咁呢個亦都係啦，有持續進修嘅基金嘅認可啦，同埋一個資歷架構嘅認證嘅。即係話咧，政府係批核晒所有我哋嘅課程嘅內容同埋師資啦。咁而課程內容咧，就其實係等同一個咧文憑嘅課程內容嚟嘅。
咁點樣先可以申請到呢個持續進修基金啊？同埋可以申請到幾多錢㗎？
係啦，講到呢樣嘢咧，就真係要詳細啲講啦。只要咧年滿18歲以上咧，同埋符合一啲課程嘅要求咧，其實你就已經可以申請咧持續進修基金嘅學費發還。咁如果咧你從來都冇申請過持續進修基金嘅話咧，我哋呢個課程咧最高甚至可以 claim 到16,000幾蚊㗎。咁即係話你每個小時嘅學費咧，只係需要70零蚊嘅啫。除此之外啦，就可以幫你，即係如果你讀埋呢個課程咧，我哋可以幫你申請埋呢個考試費嘅發還。最高可以 claim 埋咧1320蚊嘅。咁你考 IELTS 都2000幾蚊啦，咁我哋幫你 claim 埋1300蚊啦。咁真係一個即係幾抵啦，係嘛？
咁70幾蚊個鐘，有咁嘅師資同埋咁全面課程，其實就真係抵嘅。
係啊。
咁好多謝 Jane 喺度同我哋講解咗咁多關於我哋 IELTS 嘅課程啦，同埋點樣幫到學生。咁我哋不如睇一睇我哋一啲學生嘅 comment 啦，一啲畢咗業嘅學生。
係啦，頭先都俾咗啲成績，大家都睇下啦。咁其實咧，我哋都好多畢咗業嘅學生咧留咗啲 comment 俾我哋嘅。好似你頭先話，頭先啲學生咁犀利，個個都滿分8分啊，7.5分等等。咁其實咧，唔係即係你可能問我啦，話佢哋可能英文嘅底好好，所以佢有咁嘅成績。但係咧，其實唔係好多即係大部分學生嚟到我哋上堂咧，佢本身個底咧都唔係咁好嘅。咁好似中間嗰個 Jason 咁啦，其實佢咧本身咧，即係佢考咗IELTS 就攞咗7分啦。咁佢本身嚟到佢考過一次㗎啦，佢嘅 reading 咧就得5.5分嘅啫。apply 咗我哋嘅技巧之後咧，佢就攞到7分咁高嘅成績喎。仲有好多唔同嘅學生啦，左手邊Michael 嘅學生啦，咁又攞7分啦。右手邊咧有啲學生咧，佢都考到8分啊，7.5等等。即係呢啲咧就大部分我哋學生咧用咗我哋技巧，所以咧就有啲咁嘅成績啦。
我見有同學仔 Rocky 啊，就問老師嘅資歷係點啊？
我哋嘅老師嘅資歷咧就係全部 教 IELTS 嘅老師咧，佢哋都係一個專業嘅老師啦。咁啊，專業程度去到邊度咧？我哋所有嘅老師都係 native English speaker 嚟嘅。咁佢哋咧亦都已經有學位或者係 master 嘅畢業啦。咁佢哋亦都咧有係甚至部分啦係我哋前考官嘅老師嚟㗎啦。
係啊，我記得有一個老師可能即係有幾個老師佢係前考官啦，再加上可能係有10幾年考官嘅經驗添。
係啦，咁啊非常之好啦，因為咁樣就真係知道我哋 marking scheme 啊，點樣俾到 tips 我哋嘅學生啦。
好，我哋睇一睇，係咯，見到我哋睇一睇下一個部分啦。
咁好啦，咁啊最後啦，咁啊非常之多謝大家啦，今日參加咗我哋講座啦。咁今日參加咗我哋同學仔咧，就可以做翻個登記。咁登記會有啲乜嘢 offer 俾到你哋咧？就係咧，我哋會送一個免費嘅 IELTS 模擬考試。咁究竟呢個 IELTS 考試有乜用咧？咁其實咧就係幫你預測到你 IELTS 嘅實際大概嘅分數。咁等你真係精準咁知道自己嚟緊可以點樣進步。同埋咧，就最好就係慳咗2000幾蚊嘅考試費嘅，
即係唔使考一次試。
係啦，你就已經知道自己嘅幾分啦。咁仲有咧，我哋會送埋一本 IELTS 嘅書仔俾你，裏邊咧有好多 Walter， 即係頭先 Walter 老師講嘅 tips， 裏邊都有嘅，咁啊更加多添啦。咁最後啦，咁啊如果真係學生想報讀我哋課程，咁我哋亦都會送翻4個月嘅 social club 嘅 activity 嘅課堂送翻俾學生嘅。
咁我不如咁啦，想登記模擬考試嘅同學仔咧，你哋喺個 chat box 度打翻個1字，係啦。咁我哋會有同事聯絡翻你嘅。同埋頭先有問答問題嘅同學仔咧，其實我哋已經 mark 低咗噶啦。咁我哋都會有同事會聯絡翻你去拎翻啲書仔嘅。
係啦，咁啊見到好多學生都即刻登記喎。啱啦，因為咧真係要考試就好有用嘅，幫到你。
好，咁跟住啦，提多次大家啦。如果怕醜唔敢出 box 問，亦都唔敢打字或者開咪啦都好啦，咁你都可以去我哋7間分校任何一間分校去做翻登記都可以嘅。係啦，咁就最後咧，我哋仲有一個 Q&A 嘅 section， 你哋會唔會都有啲問題問啊？我哋而家都會 hold 喺度，大概2分鐘鬆啲嘅。咁你哋有問題問，開咪喺 chat box 問，我哋都會答到你嘅。
係啦，咁我嚟會留多幾分鐘啦，咁等同學咧做個登記同埋問問題嘅。好啦，咁啊
，Hello 各位，如果想登記咧攞嗰個禮品啦，IELTS 書嘅同學仔啦，麻煩咧就私信我啊，留翻低你個名啦，同埋電話號碼嘅。因為你哋而家 Zoom 個名咧，我哋未必知道你哋係邊一位啊，咁樣咁麻煩私信 technician 嗰個 account 啦，唔該晒。
睇下先，課程有冇分數嘅保證啊？
係啦，如果分數保證咧，我哋係會有分數保證嘅。咁呢個分數保證係點樣咧？只要你嚟到我哋分校啦，做一個模擬考試，達到某一個程度嘅話咧，咁我哋會有一個分數保證嘅。
OK，
有分數保證㗎。
好，睇下先，仲有冇人有問題啊？好，大概每堂上幾耐啊？
大概每堂上幾耐咧？咁我哋咧就會總共90小時嘅課程啦，每堂係3個小時嘅。咁裏邊咧係會教15個單元。每個單元咧會有2堂，咁啊一堂咧就教skill 啦，咁另外一堂咧就係一個 practice 嘅課程嚟嘅，咁即係一個 module 咧就係6個小時，
即係每堂3個鐘。
係啊，
咁通常啲時間係咩時間到上學㗎？
唔同時間咧，我哋每個分校咧都有佢嘅 time slot 啦。咁當然啦，即係每個分校我哋都有幾班嘅 IELTS 可以俾你揀嘅。咁如果你真係想知道嘅話咧，都可以留言啦。咁啊，我哋會揾翻我哋嘅課程顧問覆翻你都得嘅。
好 ，email address。好，Wendy，不如我哋
我哋會揾我哋你
我會私信你嘅，係啊，你私信將你嗰個名啦同埋電話 number 啊喺個 chat room 嗰度 send 去 technician 個 account 嗰度啊，唔該。
好，全個課程幾耐啊？
全個課程咧，如果根據我哋嘅進度啦，90小時課程咧，如果你係即係跟翻我哋嘅進度咧，大概4個月左右可以完成個課程。咁如果有啲學生咧比較急嘅話咧，佢一個禮拜可以上多啲堂咧，就係你甚至可以2個零3個月都可以完成嘅。
好，仲有就如果 DSE 英文肥佬啊，IELTS 有冇幫助㗎？
絕對有幫助，因為咧，我頭先都講啦，有好多學生失手。咁啊，我之前咧有一個咁啱啊，上個禮拜有一個學生佢即係揾我哋幫手啦，就係佢 DSE 考咗3分，咁所以佢 apply 唔到佢想嘅大學，咁啊最後嚟到我哋嗰度咧就幫佢考到7分啦。咁就IELTS 因為每個月都有考㗎啦，咁你就可以即刻補上你個IELTS 分數去 apply 大學嘅。
其實我見到有好多可能4月到考完 DSE 啦，跟住佢哋就即刻讀我哋 IELTS 課程，7、8月之前就考埋個 IELTS 成績出嚟，就攞個 IELTS 攞嚟報大學都有嘅。係啦，咁不過而家就調翻轉啦，而家個 DSE 好似褪遲咗，所以我其實見到有啲同學仔提早考咗 IELTS 先，係啦，
係啦，
咁就 before DSE 之前攞住個 IELTS 成績。
其實係咁樣就穩陣好多嘅。
仲有喎，睇下先，係咪 online 嘅 mock exam 啊
？online 嘅exam 可以安排你去即係做一個 online 嘅 mock exam 嘅，咁亦都咧，如果真係想親身嚟我哋分校都可以嘅。
係咪 online 上堂？
暫時嚟講咧，我哋嘅90小時課程咧，係一個面授嘅課程，但係咧，因為政府即係而家疫情關係啦，咁我哋就係一個轉咗 online 上啦。咁但係遲啲咧轉翻咧，我哋會係面授嘅。咁當然啦，你話我真係淨係想 online 嘅，我哋都有 online 嘅淨係 online 嘅課堂。
咁想問幾時會考啊？
考 IELTS 係咪啊？即係應該係嘛？
我諗係
啦。咁 IELTS 幾時考咧？我哋IELTS 嘅考試中心咧就會每個月都會有佢嘅 time slot 嘅，基本上差唔多個禮拜都有得考噶啦。咁啊要上翻去 IELTS 考試中心嗰度去查翻嘅。
咁 IELTS mock exam 要幾多？要多少費用？今次參加我哋嘅webinar 嘅同學仔係免費嘅個 mock exam。
係啦，只要你做咗個登記，咁呢個 IELTS 嘅 mock exam 係免費嘅。咁係啦，你可以私信我哋啦。咁應該你都諗住，如果免費都 OK 係咪啊？咁我都可以 mark 低你嘅名嘅。
好，課程費用
係啦，咁課程費用咧，你都可以揾翻我哋課程顧問。咁因為你登記應該跟我哋 WhatsApp 啦，咁我哋咧會詳細啲講解嘅。咁頭先都講咗啦，如果你冇申請過持續進修基金咧，大概即係申請咗之後啦，就大概70零蚊一個鐘啦。
When will the mock exam start？mock exam 係我哋可以同你去安排翻時間嘅，咁所以就可以揾翻我哋嘅課程顧問啦。
係啦，
咁就同你安排翻一個時間去做翻你個 mock 嘅。
係啦，咁跟翻咧 WhatsApp 咧，你send 咗去你 WhatsApp 嗰個 Zoom link 嗰度咧，你可以 reply 翻個 Zoom link 嗰個 WhatsApp，然後咧就話我想登記嗰個mock exam，咁就可以幫你安排個時間噶。係
咪 WhatsApp 報名？係可以 WhatsApp 報名㗎。
WhatsApp 冇人，絕對可以。
咁你就聯絡我哋，咁我哋就會同你夾翻個時間，咁樣咯。
好多問題啊！咁我哋陸續都會解答晒你哋噶啦。
仲有冇多少少問題？
係啦，都見到有學生留咗即電話啦、email 啦。
想請問下呢個 mock exam 免費至幾時啊？因為想先準備一下。
好，呢個 mock exam 咧，只要你登記咧，咁課程顧問會安排時間。咁你可以揀一啲遲少少嘅時間啦。咁但係咧就呢個 mock exam 咧就係今個月嘅啫。咁你要今個月去考咗佢。當然啦，你話使唔使特別去預備咧？其實都唔太需要嘅，因為咧呢個 exam 咧就真係幫你去預測下你嘅成績，大概嘅成績。咁我哋就會再俾翻建議你啦。 係啦，大致上係咁樣啦，咁就睇下仲有冇其他問題或者咧登記，咁我哋咧今日咧就好
可以講解下 IELTS online 課程係乜嘢？
好啦，online 嘅課程咧，咁其實同我即係面授嘅課程都係大致上個內容會係一樣，咁但係咧可能個時間上邊咧就係會得一個 time slot 嘅啫，咁到時咧你都可以問翻我哋嘅課程顧問，內容係基本上係一樣嘅。
好，跟住啦，就係is mock exam including all 4 papers？
我哋都係會，我哋呢個 mock exam 咧，其實咧我哋會有都主要睇下你考，即係我哋先會俾一至兩份 paper 你考咗先啦。咁當我哋咧覺得你嘅即係仲需要再 further 去睇多少少你嘅程度啊，或者你嘅英文狀況啊，咁我哋可能都會俾多一至兩份卷你去做嘅。咁唔係一個 full 嘅 mock 嚟嘅。咁當然啦，如果真係我哋覺得你係需要 full 嘅，咁我哋就會俾晒個 full mock 你去做啦。